Hi, this is Paul, and I have a new guest on today, and she made it to one of our meetups, so we've had a chance to meet before. But why don't you introduce yourself a little bit?
Well, my name's Karen, and I'm an artist, and I have two daughters, and my husband's in high tech in Silicon Valley.
Okay.
And one of my goals coming out of this is to start up a meetup in Silicon Valley.
Wonderful.
And also, I'd like to connect with some of the people that you've talked to before, because I have ideas I'd like to talk over with them that come out of what I'm going to be discussing today. So.
Oh, cool, cool. Well, I've been thinking, there's actually in a couple of weeks, there's going to be a group of people that I've talked to, and someone reserved a spot and said, can we have this person and this person and this person with, can we have these two people with me and you? And so we're actually setting that up. So there might be some more future permutations that could be a lot of fun.
That would be pretty cool. Yep.
So we're playing around with some ideas. So go ahead, jump in.
So I got started on Jordan Peterson probably a few months before the C16 thing. And I had seen online just a random 10 rules for life. And it was a compilation somebody had put together of him with his college classes talking about things very directly to his students. And I was very impressed with that. And I thought, wow, here's somebody who really understands what life is all about. So by watching that, I think I got on the YouTube algorithm and a lot of stuff started popping up. So I started watching other videos, and I started in on the biblical series. Well, I watched a lot of the college classes first, and then I started in on the biblical series about midway through the summer when he was doing them. And so I had to catch up all the first ones and then finish the rest of them. And that really drew me to him was that he communicates pretty much the same way I do.
Oh.
And I thought there's three ways in which he communicates the same way I do. The first is that he's a process thinker. He thinks through his ideas while he's talking to people. And I discovered that about myself when I was probably in my 20s. And I thought meant there was something wrong with me, because I noticed other people kind of thought their ideas through and then spoke. And I would be thinking things through as I was talking.
Uh-huh.
And so a lot of people don't have patience to listen to that. So,
Mm-hmm.
And then every idea he puts out there has 1,000 things attached to it. And he's always going down one trail or another into these things, because that's what builds the substructure of the basement that's underneath his idea. And he doesn't want to throw anybody off with this idea without them fully understanding what it is he's talking about. And I do the same thing, and that drives some people just crazy. But I'm blessed in that I have a couple of friends who are willing to listen to me, think my way through things, and listen to me go on my bunny trails. Nobody in my family, but some of my friends. And then the way he thinks about the universe is that he puts everything together. He sees connections everywhere. And I've been that way ever since I became a follower of Jesus back in 1980. Because like a tree is not just a tree. A tree, it tells stories, it tells parables, it connects to psychology and relationships and history and poetry and art. It just connects to everything, right? So everything in the world is like that. It's where Jordan talks about it's not a world of objects, but a forum for action. And not only a forum for action, but that forum for action means that there's narrative in everything. Mm-hmm. So everything I look at starts my mind going off on this trail, mm-hmm. which makes it very hard to put ideas together. So I spent hours putting stuff together today because I wanted to narrow it down to one thread.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm going to go off, So listening to him kind of rewrote my brain in that it got me realizing that if I'm actually going to be thinking of, well, I'll go back a little bit. I started doing art in the year 2000. And my daughter was 3 at the time, and I discovered that I wasn't using any words over 1 syllable, and I didn't have anybody to talk to, and I was kind of losing my ability to communicate. So art gave me a forum to communicate ideas and concepts that were deeper inside me. And the more I got into it, the more I got into creativity and all of those things, it gave me a different way of looking at the world. And one of the pictures that I got was that we each have what I would call experiential DNA.
What do you mean by that?
It's kind of the matrix of our experience allows us or causes us to receive everything through a filter and to put out everything through a filter. So every book that I've read, every song I've heard, every hymn I've sung in a church, every message I've heard in church, every painting I've seen, all of those things have changed, transformed something in me, made me see the world through a different filter. Mm-hmm. And then when I speak, I'm also speaking through that same filter.
Yep.
So I had a Russian friend back about that time. Actually, I met her in the mid-90s when I was a intercultural communications consultant. And she told me that there's this old Russian story or proverb that every truth spoken becomes a lie. And I know Jordan says the truth spoken creates the best of all possible worlds. But she wasn't talking about that. She was talking about how you have the truth inside your head. You can picture it. You have this vision of it. But by the time it comes out in your mouth going through this filter of the way you see the world, it's no longer solid.
Yep.
And then when the other person receives it, it's even less solid.
Yep. Yep.
It's very difficult for us to actually communicate truthfully with each other.
Yep. Yeah, that's very true. It's a good proverb.
Yeah. So anyway, listening to him got me thinking I need to learn more, obviously, about psychology and physics and philosophy. And so I've been like trying to store up like crazy, listening to videos, listening to your videos, listening to physicists and experts in calculus and all this kind of stuff. Because I have this picture of all the disciplines of the world. They kind of stack up together to manifest reality. And I use the word manifest instead of create reality because of the way I see information. It seems to me that in my mind, the way it works, all information flows from God. So like the Big Bang, before time, space, and matter exist, the Big Bang happens. And what's flowing out into this new universe is energy / information / matter. Mm-hmm. That's one thing that's going out into the universe, and it's creating the cosmos as it goes. It's moving out with this energy, creating the cosmos. It can't just be energy and matter. There has to be information in it. Otherwise, we aren't what we are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the thing that for me is information is everything. So
and what is information?
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it? Yeah. We're going to get there.
Okay.
I mean, I'll go off on a little bunny trail. You can look at information as reducible to zeros and ones because that's what they do in the digital world.
Yeah.
So when they use binary code for writing code, everything is reduced to zeros and ones, and everything can be communicated using zeros and ones. You can communicate letters and numbers, and that can all run through the chip as processor and create all sorts of worlds. So if you could imagine that we could take a slice of the universe, and I'm lying on my hammock looking up at the upper half of the universe, and I take a picture of it. That is a photograph that could be digitized into zeros and ones, and it could be run down a telephone line or shot out into space, and it could end up at somebody's computer over there, downloaded, turned into a photograph on the other end. and it was just zeros and ones going across the line, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what if that photograph is just a slice, a very thin slice of the universe, but the whole universe is composed of zeros and ones like that, right? So now you have the whole entire universe is completely densely packed with information, every bit of it. And so physicists, people who are interested in physics, mathematics, all of these people, they go on the hero's journey out into this field of potential, this bunch of information, and they pull out a little piece of it, and they follow that trail, and it turns into something like the Pythagorean theorem or Euler's equation or something like that. And now that information becomes available to us. It's like going over into chaos and gathering the treasures hidden there, bringing them back to manifest a better world, you know, to rejuvenate order. So that's the way I see information. And so what you have then is you have all these different disciplines that have built this structure of information, and they're building up all this information into their system, and all these systems actually stack up upon each other and they connect. And so inside my head, the picture I have, my husband, I told you, is in high tech, and he works with chips. So are you familiar with how chips are made? Okay, so in the beginning, when they first started doing the simplest chips, they would just take this photograph of the diagram of the gateways and the pathways and so forth, and somehow they impress it on top of the silicon wafer, and that makes a tiny little channel, and they pour, I think it's copper in there, and that fills the channel and it makes the connections. But as more and more information needed to be going through these chips, needed to be processed, and as they've added more and more functionality to the chips, they've had to like dig down into the basement and make more layers, and each layer is like a subterranean city, and another subterranean city underneath that, and another underneath that. So let's imagine that one of those subterranean cities is the world of physics, and one of them is the world of language. One of them is the world of calculus, and of course that'd probably be part of physics, but one of them is the world of biology, and one of them is the world of chemistry, and one of them is the world of art, and one of them is the world of history. All these sets of information stack up. The way they connect one layer to another in this chip is through little tubes that go up to the next layer, and those are called vias, V-I-A, which I love, like the way, right?
Right.
Yeah. So the little vias are connecting the next layer up to the next layer to take the information up to the next layer. Well, my thought is that these vias, the thing that connects one discipline to another discipline, that those are actually the places of beauty in that discipline.
That's interesting.
God shows up through these connections. Because if you look at Chris's idea about the asymptote and calculus, that's the place of beauty in calculus. Even Strogatz talked about that in his lecture on the beauty of calculus, how this concept of the asymptote and the concept of maximum divisibility to solve a problem is such it's infinitely complex in one way, but in another way, it's infinitely simple. And then you listen to Neil Turok with his lecture on the simplicity of the world, of the universe, when he's talking about physics. The places where physics gets beautiful is the places where it's infinitely simple. For example, he says at the largest scale, which is 10 to the 25, it's so unbelievably simple that they can't figure out how nature managed it. And at the smallest scale, which is 10 to the minus 35, the scale is it's so beautifully simple. That's about the scale of an atom, like a hydrogen atom. And he said it only gets messy in the middle. So we're at the middle. We're at the 10 to the minus 5, and we're at this messy middle. That's where all the complexity and mess resides, is in the middle. So I thought, there's all these pictures. When you listen to people talk about physics, there's pictures that relate to the reality of human relationships and relate to historical movements, and everything relates to everything. And it gets a little overwhelming trying to think my way through it, which is why I'd like to talk to some people who know a lot more than I do, so that I could work my way through some of these thoughts.
That's a cool thing. I'm very impressed that you've clearly thought a lot about this and have really put it together in a very, I'm very impressed at what you did in the last 15 minutes. That was very, very cool. So,
well,
I just be proud of yourself. Oh boy.
Yeah, sorry.
No, but that's good. Well, you should. I mean, so what are you doing with all of this? Are you, I mean, YouTube, anybody can put anything on YouTube. You thinking of sitting down and, I mean, what's the best way for you? So it's really interesting to me too that you're an artist, because it's amazing how many tech people I've interacted with and how many artists I'd interacted with. And I would have never imagined the artists, but there you are. It's very interesting.
Well, let me take a little side journey here to explain to you how art fits into this. I read Jordan, I saw Jordan Peterson's videos, and some of them, especially when he's doing his psychology and personality classes with his students, he's using a lot of terminology I've never heard before.
Yep.
Very complex. And so I'm listening to him, and I'm trying to follow it and trying to really internalize it.
Yep.
And at first I was really having a hard time getting a grip on it. And then all of a sudden, my brain took everything that I've learned about art, the elements and principles of design, and it just mapped over onto what he was talking about. And the map was so perfect that I found that I could actually read his book, Maps of Meaning, which is so difficult.
Yeah.
But the only way I could read it was by seeing his concepts through my filter of the elements and principles of design. Now, here's an example of how these systems stack up. There are 7 elements, at least the way I learned it. There's probably depends on who your teacher is, but the way I learned it, it's line, size, shape, direction, color, value, and texture. And then there are 8 principles: unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, repetition, variation, gradation, and balance. So you set up a matrix with the elements down one side and the principles across the bottom. So you have line, which needs to represent unity, harmony, contrast, dominance, repetition, gradation, variation, and balance. And a line can do that. A line can be wide or narrow. It can be wiggly. It can have texture. It can repeat. It can have balance. It can have contrast. So you have this matrix. You work the matrix out, you come out with about 88 possibilities, but then you have to add in color is one of the elements, and there's 256 million colors at a minimum. That's what they have on the computer, but you know, our eye can probably process more than that. That means every time as an artist you make a decision, you're making a decision that falls within this infinite field of potential. Every choice you make is staggering. You can get immobilized, like Jordan says, you can get immobilized by this infinite field of potential. And as an artist, you have to have a way of making decisions. And interestingly enough, what forces you into a space of the maximum creativity is to put some very strong boundaries around your process. So I took this creativity class. I've actually taken it 8 times. And the boundary he puts on us, well, first of all, you have the boundary of the rectangle or the square within which you are working. But then beyond that, he puts on a boundary of you have to do 2 large paintings every week. You do them at home, you bring them into class. And all 20 paintings over the 10-week course of the class have to be of the same subject in the same place on the canvas. So you've narrowed your choices by your subject. And you've also put yourself in a position where after the first 3 or 4 paintings, you're just bored to tears with this subject.
Yeah.
Well, then it's like, what do I do now? You know, I got to do something.
Yeah.
Well, what if I did this? Well, what if I did that? And it's that what if that leads you down trails that open up all sorts of avenues. And what happened to me a number of years back is that I discovered that my maximally beautiful pieces came when I created chaos all over my canvas by whatever means I could think of, whether with paint or paper or just scuffling stuff around or pasting pictures on top of it or whatever. Just create a bunch of chaos and then step back and look at the chaos and try to determine what can I find in there that's useful. What do I see? Do I see anything? And if I see something, then I can bring it out of the chaos, back off some of the other stuff, cover up some things, leave some of the little treasures there. And that whole process is terrifying because what if I can't find anything in there, you know?
Yeah.
Or what if I can't rein it in once I get it to a certain state? I used to go and do fundraisers where I would go to the fundraiser and I'd set up my easel. And every person that would come to the fundraiser would come and I'd let them make a big mess on the canvas. And so just before the dinner would start, I'd have this canvas covered with just huge mess. And then it was my responsibility to turn it into something beautiful that could be auctioned off at the end of the night.
Very cool.
And it's terrifying.
Yeah.
And the only thing for me that keeps it from being maximally terrifying is that I can ask the Lord to help me find something.
Yeah.
Beautiful, right? Which is the way he works in our lives. That's how I know everything stacks up. But I began to picture it as I'm listening to Jordan. I began to picture it as kind of this is the hero's journey. So on days when art and fear are very tightly bound together, there's a great book by Orland and Bales called Art and Fear. Not a very long book, but it is so profound. I think it gets down to the structure of the universe, actually. But I used to just be so afraid every time I stand in front of a blank canvas, which is why I started putting all the chaos in there, because at least I had something to work with. But I was just afraid because I'd think, oh, I must be a fraud. I don't really know what I'm doing. Nobody's going to like what I do. And why do I think I should even try to be an artist? And I had all these thoughts. And about 15 years ago, then I read this book at the behest of my teacher. And the book says, artists have all these thoughts. And then he lists all these thoughts. And I thought, those are my thoughts. I must be an artist. So there's something about the way the world is created that, and of course, God has gifted us with being created in his image. So he is a creator and he's given us the capacity to create, or at least to use the resources that he's given us to create. He creates with his own resources, but
we're sub-creators.
Yeah. So we have that opportunity. And this whole thing about the elements and principles of design, when the way that I understand it and the way that I use it really maps over onto Jordan Peterson's thing. But I also find it mapping over onto the world of physics and mapping over onto the world of calculus. And there are just so many threads that are similar in the way that you have to make decisions and in the way that you process information and all of that, which is what got me started on this whole thing about the argument from beauty, that the little vias that connect the layers of all the worldly disciplines together are really the beauty that he's placed there for us. So now, I was actually going to talk about history and the future, but I might take one more little dip outside of my original idea, because I was listening to your discussion on Vervaeke. Was that a new one that you just put out that popped up on my...
Today?
You were talking about Vervaeke's idea about the Lectio Divina?
Yeah.
Okay. So that got me, that connected for me with Jordan Peterson's recent lecture about why it is that he despairs of calling himself, that he's afraid, not afraid, he's reluctant to say that he believes in God. And I spent a lot of time putting my thoughts together on this, because I feel so for him when I see him suffering so. It's just painful to see him that way.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I mean, he put out a little note about his wife, but she's got, I mean, she's seriously ill. This cancer that she has is not, you know, this isn't, I mean, this is a serious business. So
yes, it's a serious business. Yes. So Jordan was talking in his lecture about, well, he was talking about Marx and this poem that Marx had written when he was young, saying that he wanted to revolve around his own son.
Yep.
So I know that Jordan Peterson says, no,
Yeah.
you know, it doesn't work that way,
Yeah.
right? So I know he completely understands that.
Yep.
But at the same time, he has this idea that believing God means fully living out everything that he believes God demands of a person. And so I was looking at this, I was thinking about this whole idea of belief. And I think for the follower of Jesus Christ, we understand that it's not, what he's reluctant about is the cheap grace, the idea of just tossing off a few words and saying, I believe.
Yep.
It's all the thing that Nietzsche was battling against.
Yep.
But what he doesn't see is that someone who's sincerely a follower of Jesus Christ is, along with this thing you had on Vervaeke, that it's this loving relationship. It's receiving God's love and loving him because he loves us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this idea is such a big idea, but it connects back to his lobster and hierarchy idea. So when he talks about the lobsters and the hierarchy, he says the lobsters that are defeated fall to the bottom of the hierarchy because they're depressed. And if you give them serotonin, they'll fight again. But if you don't, they won't.
Yeah.
Okay, so yes, those are hierarchies that show up in the world and people stack up at the bottom. But I don't think that that is the hierarchy that God intends, because I think there is a hierarchy in God's economy. And I have a little different picture of that hierarchy. And so for me, I'm going to use the concept of a string. I'll call it my string theory.
Okay.
We say in art that everybody's somewhere on the string. Some people are further along. They have more skill. They've been doing this longer. Maybe they even have more talent. They're a little bit further along the string. But wherever you are on the string, you're on the string and you're moving along the string, and that's what really counts. So I have found in the art community that most of the people on the string are perfectly gracious about reaching back and teaching you whatever they know and helping you move a little further along the string.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there are a lot of disciplines that are like that.
Mm-hmm.
People are eager to help other people learn, eager to mentor people who are interested, and we're all moving along the string,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is quite different than this idea of trying to climb up some competence hierarchy or climb up some power hierarchy and get batted down and end up at the bottom depressed. It's more like everybody's moving along the string. Now, if I put that together, I have such a strange mind. So Neil Turok's lecture, he was talking about the discovery of the imaginary number. His lecture is called The Simplicity of Everything. Turok. And he was talking about the discovery of the imaginary number, which is I squared equals -1. So I then is the square root of -1. When they made that discovery, they found that they could solve any equation if they could use that imaginary number. So it opened up worlds of information to them when they made that discovery. Well, if you exponentiate a real number, you get an asymptote. If you exponentiate an imaginary number, you get a circle.
That's interesting.
Now, I want you to think about, we have a circle and we have an axis in the center of the circle that's going up.
Okay.
And that would make a cone, which is like a hierarchy, right?
Right.
The axis has no beginning and no end. It's a line. We know that from geometry, right? Yeah. Jesus is the axis. Goes on forever. And in your discussion with Jonathan Pageau, he talked about the idea that Jesus is at the top of the hierarchy and he can also move along the hierarchy all the way to the bottom and then back, always right down, up, down in the center. So that's in my picture, Jesus as the axis of the hierarchy. All of us are somewhere on the circle, which is the line. That's the imaginary number. That's our connection. But then we are like the asymptote, because as we grow in our relationship with Christ, and we grow in our maturity, and we grow in our knowledge of God, and we are moving along exponentially, getting closer, and at the same time curving upward, getting ever and ever closer to the axis. But we never touch, because we can never be Christ, but we're getting closer and closer to him. Yeah. So now you have everybody out here on the perimeter, and they're all moving up the string. Everybody's somewhere on these strings, and we're all helping each other. And as we get closer to Christ, we're all getting closer to each other. Now, to me, that's the picture of hierarchy I would like Jordan Peterson to see, because that's not only the hierarchy of growing in maturity with Christ, but it's the hierarchies. There are hierarchies in every discipline that could be working the same way if they were infused with the power of Christ, because the axis in every hierarchy is Christ. He is the great engineer. He is the great artist. He is the great architect. He is the great physicist. He is the creator of worlds. So he's the axis of every hierarchy.
That's really cool. That's a really, really cool vision.
But I'd like to talk to somebody who really knows math, because this is all I get from the lectures, and I don't really know what I'm talking about. But I think it's a possibility.
People will jump in on that, I think, in the comment section. But that's a really cool vision. It reminds me of, it reminds me somewhat of the work of Dallas Willard and the way he talks about Christ, and the way he talks about him in the beginning of the Divine Comedy. That when Dallas, when I read the Divine Comedy years ago, Dallas kind of forced me to think about Christ in a new way, and it's sort of along the lines of what you just drew out for us. That's very, very interesting.
So I've heard you talk a lot about Dallas Willard,
Yeah.
and I go to Menlo Church with John Ortberg, and he talks a lot about Dallas Willard.
Well, he was Dallas's disciple.
Oh, is that it? Okay.
He wrote, so a lot of...
I mean, I've never read any of Dallas Willard's book. I just hear these quotes every once in a while.
Well, John Ortberg wrote a bunch of books, and John would say, I've never met John Ortberg. I've just read his stuff, and, but he would often say that his books are really Dallas for dummies. So if you're going to Menlo Park Presbyterian, where John Ortberg is preaching, all of that Dallas Willard stuff is infused in John Ortberg, and that's what he's doing. That's very interesting.
What's interesting is he took a turn maybe a year and a half ago, and his sermons have become deeper and deeper and deeper.
Really?
It used to be kind of light too. I mean, we were there for other reasons, not necessarily for the teaching, but it may just be me, but long about the time I started listening to Jordan Peterson, I started hearing John teach about things that made me think he also is listening to Jordan Peterson.
Well, John Ortberg, if you're listening to our conversation, send me an email. We'll talk. That's really, it could, because preaching is very much it's the preacher and the listener. It's both are working, and that's one thing you learn as a preacher is that you're sort of broadcasting, but anyone who's listening, they are, like you said early on, they have this filter, and that filter, it's very similar to some of the stuff Peterson tried to get into Sam Harris's head in their conversation, but couldn't. But so this is very much, that's very interesting. So I
don't know if you have time, but he did a series, I think it was last fall, on the Sermon on the Mount. And the whole series was just week after week after week. It just went along with everything else I was learning.
Well, see, The Divine Conspiracy, which is, in my opinion, Dallas Willard's greatest book, is about the Sermon on the Mount.
Ah, okay.
And so Dallas Willard's stuff on the Sermon on the Mount, I don't, kind of like Peterson, I don't always agree with Willard exegetically, but in terms of wisdom, it is very deep, rich stuff. And of course, Willard was a professor of philosophy at USC for years, and he was a phenomenologist. So Husserl was his focus of study. So again, when I started looking at Peterson right away, I thought I'm going to have to really keep track of C.S. Lewis. But very quickly, Dallas Willard stuff came up in my mind. And the difficulty with integrating much of Dallas Willard stuff with my videos is that there's not much stuff out there. And every time I use any Veritas Forum stuff of Dallas Willard's, the YouTube kind of starts, you're using copyrighted material. And so I haven't done a lot of that, because Veritas kind of continues to monitor their own fence on their material. But that's fascinating to me that you're at Ortberg's church, because Ortberg was very much Dallas Willard's disciple and has been plain about that for years.
Well, see, this shows you how little I know. I've never studied philosophy. I had philosophy in college, but I slept through it. That was a long time ago. All I got out of it is every one of the philosophers that they talked about. Of course, I went to college back in the hippie days, and probably all they were teaching us was the philosophy of, the new world that's coming or something.
Yeah.
I just remember that every philosopher he talked about either committed suicide or ended up in an insane asylum. So I thought, why would I want to know what these guys think? But I wasn't a Christian then either, so I wasn't interested in very deep things, and I didn't become a follower,
Well, see, that's Ortberg's language. See, now that I know this, connections are being made because I've known. See, I remember Ortberg. I heard him preach back when he was at Willow Creek in Chicago, and then I know he went to Menlo Park. And there are some other connections. I've never met him personally. I don't have any personal connections with him, but I have followed some of his work, and I have a number of years ago used a number of his books. So you're connecting dots here. For me, and now this is very interesting.
Okay, so now we have a few minutes. I want to talk about this idea about history.
Okay.
And the only reason I'm going to do that is that it woke me up at 4 o'clock this morning.
So that's a good reason to talk about it.
Reason to think about it.
Your Consciousness Congress is working. It's doing what it should be. It's saying, hey, pay attention to this.
Well, so anyway, Jordan Peterson was reading this horrifying poem that Marx wrote in which he said he wanted to revolve around his own son.
Right.
And I noticed today that Cy Gart, who is a biochemist that I follow on Twitter, tweeted out this very cool thing. That
How do you spell this guy's name? Cy.
G-A-R-T-E. Cy Gart. G-A-R-T-E. And of course, I thought I had typed it out. Maybe I didn't. I won't look very long. Well, it's the idea that even the cells in our biology require solar input, and that solar input, the cells change the solar input into chemical energy. So we need input from the sun. We can't be our own sun. That's my word for Marx. Anyway, Jordan Peterson says that we're each faced with a field of infinite potential every moment we're alive, and we have to make a choice about what to do. It's hard to make that choice because we don't know in this field of infinite potential what to do, but our choices are proscribed by limits that make certain choices are going to make us more successful than other choices. So every time we make a choice, the future is created a little bit more, and we're building the future in front of us. In the same way that the universe, as the universe is expanding out into the beyond where it is now, it's continuing to expand out into something that is the future, because that movement forward is creating the future. Neil Turok says when we look out into the night sky, we're actually looking backward in time, which is kind of an interesting idea,
that's true.
right?
That's true.
But the choices that we make are creating the future in front of us. But that also means that it's not only energy that's creating that future, but it's also ideas and individual choices of countless humans from the beginning of humanity. So some of the choices are actions, some of the choices are ideas. Those ideas, we pluck information out of the universe and we use that to build the future. But some of those are ideas also, like Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. That's also an idea. That idea entered history, and the future began to spool forth from that idea. And on Neil Turok's lecture, he has a very interesting picture of what a segment of the universe looks like as history spools out forward. And it's a little bit bell-shaped because it's sort of moving, moving out faster and faster now, so that there's like a bell at the end of it. So we talked about the chip and the pathways of beauty, and Jordan Peterson's idea that truth brings forth the best of all possible worlds. And that truth spoken into the world, there's several different ways that truth gets spoken into the world. God spoke at the beginning of time, and that in the first chapter of Genesis, every time he spoke, something new happened. Then there's also the speaking that's from his book, the book of the Word of God, and also the speaking that's from nature. But I have a question that I would love to explore with you or somebody else, and that is that, isn't it so that a truth has to be not only spoken, but also received in order to be useful? And is it possible that truth, it can actually bring forth bad things? I mean, Jordan says the truth spoken brings forth the best of all possible worlds. And I know what he's talking about when he says that. He's talking about Jesus speaking the universe into existence, and he's talking about if you have to choose between speaking the truth or lying at work, even if speaking the truth is going to get you fired, that's still a better reality than lying. But it also seems to me that there are situations that I see people getting into, especially people of good heart, where their opponents use their truth to twist and use that truth to twist reality.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's such an interesting question and idea. And I often think that when Jordan says that about the truth, that could be a statement of more faith than nearly anything else he says, especially in terms of what I call God number two, a personal God. That because it imagines that the speaking of the truth, part of the difficulty that we have is, and I'm actually working on some of these ideas in my sermon for this Sunday, because in Isaiah, God basically says in chapter 44 and 45, I am in charge, and I can bring good or I can bring evil. And it's like, well, what do you mean God can bring evil? Well, okay, let's understand that within the conversation, which is things may come at me and I might experience these things as evil. Just like when I was a toddler, my mom brought me into the doctor's office and the nurse came at me with that big syringe and poked it in me. Yeah. Now, was that good or was that evil? From my point of view, that was evil. From anti-vaxxers, that was evil. From the doctor and my mother and me, pretty much, I'm glad I got vaccinations, I count that as good. So this value judgment is sort of out there. And the message...
It also goes to love, right?
That's right.
Because Jordan understands very well that God is good.
Yes.
Which for me is like my sub basement. God is good. That rock has carried me through many difficult places. But I don't think he understands that God is love, because that's the big equivalent. God and love equal. So that makes a huge difference when you're wrestling with a question like that about suffering and struggle and torture and evil and all of those things, is that because God's love is so great, he's willing to suffer. He's willing to suffer with us and in us and through us and for us.
Yes.
And
Jordan has a bunch of those pieces, but he hasn't seemed to put them together. And that comes through with his statements about belief, his fear, his prayer request at Liberty University. And I think you said it very well. What Christianity, everybody in the ancient world, unlike secular people who have their buffered selves in this immanent frame here, everyone in the ancient world could understand that God was powerful. The revelation of Jesus Christ is that God is good. And even given, so Israel is God's chosen people. Well, if you look at what they suffered, someone in Israel might well say, well, choose someone else, thank you, because you seem to choose us to suffer. And Jesus fully embodies that, but also, and this is why the resurrection is so key. If you lose the resurrection in the story, and not just a storied resurrection, but a resurrection at all of those layers that you mapped out. If you lose that resurrection, you lose this foundational piece of the goodness of God. And you have that you even hear that in Job. Though he slay me, yet I will praise him. And I fully understand when, Vervaeke looks at some of this stuff and says, ooh, narcissism. And when others look at that and say, ooh, that's dysfunctional, because they have implied a story of equal agents. No ancient person who is embedded in nature would ever imagine themselves so large. And that largeness that we imagine ourselves to be and to have is, I think, what sets up the problem of evil. But it's an illusion. And I think what we're beginning to deal now, so I just talked to Burn Power a little bit this morning. I'm going to post his video tomorrow. And he nicely framed some of Jacques Ellul's ideas about what we have done in terms of nature and then civilization. We have now created civilization, and in a sense, civilization is sort of a golem. It's sort of a giant robot that we face off with God and say, our civilization can keep us safe. And right now, in this moment with fear about environmental catastrophe, nuclear war, the meaning crisis, all of these things, we're feeling the fragility of civilization, and that then will force people into this existential crisis where they will be asked to ask the question, can I believe that God is good? That's really the question people struggle with. Can I trust him? And that question goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden in Genesis 3, because the man and the woman, Adam and Eve, what is really at the heart of their sin is Satan suggests he's holding out on you. You can't really trust him. You must be your own Savior and Lord. And so that
make your own reality.
That's right. That's right. Because we create our own reality in order to resist him. Mm-hmm. And that's in a sense what nature was our reality. So then we create this huge civilization, and now you can't walk through Costco and see natural, organic, and say, we got some doubts about these, Jonathan Pageau might say, these garments of skin, although God gives them garments of skin, and but we have some doubts about these layers that we put on ourselves, that this really will finally keep us. And then in a sense,
I liked what you said on the Vervaeke thing about the essence of the resurrection is not just about the event, but it catapults forward into history.
That's right.
It permeates, it percolates through everything as it moves forward into history.
That's right. It completely changes.
That's where the hope is, see?
That's right. It completely changes the game, which is why, Oscar Wilde's great play when he has Herod saying, let him heal the sick, but don't let him raise the dead. Because if the dead are raised, the final tool of tyranny is undone. And the game is changed. And movie makers and story writers have known this forever and have been using it. But did you ever
see that video Jonathan Pageau made about superheroes and the problem with what happens with superhero worlds, that they get more and more and more power over time until finally they have so much power that the stories aren't interesting anymore because there's no way to undo them. And then they have to rechange the frame and find something new, like when kryptonite came into the Superman.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Exactly what it is, right?
It gets boring. Because suddenly Superman, hey, I'm wearing this shirt today. My wife bought me this shirt when I went on vacation last year. She said, you can make a video, but I'm buying you a shirt that you have to wear. And we got this shirt at the thrift store. And I'm like, yeah, that's a cool shirt. She says, that's not weird enough. I'll get you another weird one. So
oh, I just noticed that. You got
my Superman shirt on.
I didn't notice that before.
Yeah. So, but yeah. And so for me, I know part, I know that's a big discussion amongst people that listen to my channel. I mean, Paul, why do you insist on the historical physical resurrection? And I think it's because the thing that differentiates Christianity from Gnosticism is Gnosticism says that this physicality, this materiality is a transitional phase off into immateriality. And Christianity, and Peterson gets this, he said this on a number of occasions, Christianity asserts the resurrection. It is not, as even so many Christians believe, I go to heaven when I die and I'm something like a ghost or a shade. No, it's as Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, it's a spiritual body. And what he means by that is not it's an immaterial body, but that it's a body which is now fully in alignment with the Spirit of God, which again brings us right back to the garden.
Lewis used to talk about it being more real than real.
That's right. And so why can Jesus come in and out of rooms? It's not that he's less real than the wall, like a ghost, but he's more real than the wall. So
he's got authority over all the atoms and molecules, and
exactly,
no problem.
Yeah, which is what Lewis writes about in Miracles.
I just had a thought I needed to. Oh, the resurrection, the Habermas lecture on the resurrection. His discussion, and I've seen a lot of others too, is that is there's more historical evidence for the resurrection, the bodily resurrection of Jesus Christ than there is for almost any other history that we have. So the people that are arguing with
a lot of ancient history,
that lecture, right?
Yeah, and the reason that it's so difficult to believe is it's such a, well, first of all, we wouldn't be, we have an inner resistance to believe something like this for the same reason as Oscar Wilde's Herod. We don't like believing things we don't want to believe in. That's a fact about human beings. Yeah. Another piece of it is we've never seen it. But now in 1800, if you were to say it is possible for a person to travel between New York and San Francisco, Los Angeles wasn't really there yet, between New York and San Francisco in less than a day, people would say that's impossible. It cannot happen. Well, now we think nothing of it because it is common. So the bias against the resurrection, as many people have pointed out, is simply a bias. Is it something that's outside of our frame of reference? Yes, but and we believe it often based on all the same reasons we believe other things. We don't do these syllogisms and then believe rationally. I mean, that's not how people work. So
yeah. The world is way too complex a place for that.
Yeah. We can't, if that's the way we believed things, we'd all be dead. And you just have to look at an infant. Why does an infant believe? And what is the belief of that infant? Well, the infant believes, they very quickly, at first we don't have, what do they believe in? Maybe they cry out for their mother. They cry out that their needs be met. And as they develop, they begin to trust. And then, then the story goes on from there.
Well,
trust and betrayal.
They fix their eyes on their mother.
That's right.
Right.
And they know her. They know their sound.
This is the other thing that I just want to throw out there, and that is that I think that sin is the proof for God. The existence of sin is the proof for God.
Say more.
And people that don't want to believe that the sin exists also don't want to believe that God exists. And I don't know where Jordan Peterson stands on sin. I'm pretty sure he doesn't believe that sin is, I'm not sure about that. I'd love to pick some people's brains about that. But
well, he understands it as missing the mark, and he very much understands it as, you listen to him talk to Sam Harris about his form of prayer where he's looking into the void at what he's done wrong. He understands that. The difficulty Peterson has is what I call with God number 2, which is a personal God.
But missing the mark in the sense of not living, not being up to snuff, not living up to your expectation of yourself, or not living up to the heroic standard that Jordan Peterson sets for himself and for other people. But sin is really that wanting to make your own reality apart from God. That was Eve's temptation, and that is where she and Adam decided to make their own reality. Basically, I don't need God. It's that. Well, and see, those two are so inextricably linked. If I don't need God, then I don't want to believe in him. I don't need to believe in him.
And I don't need God means that and this comes again with Charles Taylor via deism, into the imagination that we can actually be without God. And that is a modern idea. The ancients might have, cursed God. I mean, Job's wife cursed God and died. That's the way it is. There was no escaping God in the ancient world. It's only in the modern world that we imagine we can achieve independence, or that there's no need for him, or that he was never there. Those are modern ideas.
Mm-hmm. So. But I still would like to explore with somebody the whole idea of, I hadn't really written down these ideas about sin, so they're not fully fleshed out, and so what I just spit out at you is not really what I think, and I don't have enough time to process it right now because I see our time is up. But
well, one of the things that maybe we can work on is I have to figure out. I'm making this channel up as I go along, and one of the things I would like to do is, so now Jeff and Job and Luke, they're all, they're in cahoots, and Jeff sends me an email and says, I want to be in a conversation with you and Job and Luke. And they'd already talked, and Jeff and Job actually met up near where Jeff lives. But I think probably one of the next evolutions of this channel is for some of us to figure out some good conversation teams, because there are certain clusters around, and you mentioned Chris and math, but we're going to want to try to get, sort of the right group together where the chemistry will be right and the interests will be similar, and then probably have a 2-hour slot, because 1 hour wouldn't be enough for that many people.
Couldn't we figure out a way that you wouldn't have to be in every single one of them, because your time is very precious, your resources are limited?
That's
but
true.
I could hook up that artist gal that you had, the soldier artist that you had on the other day. She could have a conversation. I could have
Joe.
Chris, and they could still go on your channel so that people could watch them, and the conversations could keep happening that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'd run them by you so you'd watch them, so you'd have some oversight, because you probably don't want to have your imprimatur on anything that doesn't.
Yeah, and I don't know if people would watch them if I'm not in it, because I've thought of, people have volunteered to say, why don't I do some of these conversations? And I thought, I don't know if that would work. Now, we could maybe start another channel. That's another possibility, where have some of these other things, but would they get I don't know. I mean, it's some of these details to figure out. And plus, I sort of miss out.
I'm starting a channel because I want to talk about this stuff, and I can't think my way through it without knowing that I'm going to be talking to somebody about it.
Well, I think that would be a good thing. So I encourage people to start their channels.
Writing, unless I know I'm going to be talking about it, and then I'll sit my butt down and get it done, so.
Well, I think that's a good idea too, because I'd like to see more channels proliferate. I'd like to, I started this channel because I wanted more people to talk to about this stuff, and I didn't have enough. And so now I've got more than I can, which is a blessing. So
yeah, shame
on me for complaining. But you're right. I don't want to be a bottleneck. And I also, so I'm still trying to figure out what all of this kind of thing all this kind of stuff means. So it's all a process of discovery.
God is afoot, Paul. God is afoot.
He is. He really is. Jonathan Pageau, in his question and answer is, I don't know if it was May or June question and answer. He made a comment in there. He said, I think there's a new openness, for conversation and exploration across some boundaries I'm rephrasing what he said. This is what I thought. This is like when people tell me what I said in a sermon. He probably didn't say this, but this is what I'm thinking, that there is right now an opportunity for openness. And Jordan Peterson's a big part of this. He sort of became the pillar of smoke that we could all find each other with and gather around.
That was not accidental, because I started watching him before he got famous, before he got infamous. And every single step of the way that made him more infamous, it was so obvious to me that God's hand was on that somehow.
Yeah.
Those things don't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And every time they happened, they catapulted him into a broader audience, and then a broader audience.
Yeah.
That's not accidental.
No, I agree.
Which is why, even though he says a lot of things that I know are not true and are not biblical, he says a lot of things that drive me deeper into the word, and that's all good. I don't see any negative on that at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what he says about faith and belief drives me to my knees more, to be more authentic than I was, not less authentic than I was. So it's all to the good that he's challenging us. And I think that's great, Well,
I agree 100%.
God can preach through anybody.
Even a donkey. Even an ass. My Old Testament professor was very annoyed. He was on the NIV study committee, and he said an ass is different from a donkey. And so he wanted the NIV to have ass, but the NIV was like, you can't put ass in the Bible. It's like, come on, it's an ass. It's
Somebody's going to interpret that you're calling Jordan Peterson a donkey.
I know. Fortunately, nobody's really started making memes or clips from my channel. It's too small, which I think I feel very blessed with how this whole year and a half has rolled out for me, and to get to meet people like you and like how many other people that I've had conversations with. It's just been a tremendous blessing. And I agree. I think this is God's hand, and God is doing stuff through this. And so he's going to keep doing stuff. That's what God does.
Yep.
So anyway, Karen, this is a delight. And I assume that you'd like me to share this.
Yeah.
And I will send it to you anyway, so you have your own personal copy. And no, this has been a great talk. So I look forward.
If I come up with any other big ideas, is it okay if I shoot you an email and run it by you?
Absolutely. And hey, start your own channel. You've got a lot of stuff to share. You've got a lot of material. And when I started my channel, I really did not expect anybody to watch. I really did not. I had been posting the Freddie and Paul show and sermons, and I'd been doing that, and I had 15 subscribers. Most of the people were Freddie's friends. And
But you do all that stuff with the outlines and the video clips, and I don't think I know how to do all that stuff, so I would just be a talking head.
Well, sounds like you have a daughter who knows a few things, so
yeah, that's true.
You can always learn. And don't be afraid of being a talking head. I think you've got really a ton of good stuff here. I think the challenge is to sort of figure out what sort of works, and don't be, I blogged for years with very few people read my blog, and still very few people read my blog. I haven't been blogging much because I've been doing this, but I always tell people that, it should be worth doing for your own sake. And
Mm-hmm.
so even if, we're at an age now, I think you and I are about the same age. We're at an age now when maybe our kids aren't terribly interested in what we're doing.
Understatement of the year.
or maybe your kids wish, even some of my children they're not real pleased at my newfound fame and notoriety. They're worried that this might be a problem for them in the future because I'm not on the right side of history strongly enough for their tastes. But 20 years from now, if YouTube, actually I mirror my channel on another video thing called Library, which actually blockchains it, so it'll probably be out there. But 20 years from now, who knows how long either of us will live, but what you're doing now, your kids may go back to and say, gosh, Mom was doing stuff. Listen to this stuff Mom knew. Can you believe it? I thought it was nuts. I thought it was stupid, but actually, this stuff makes sense. This is important. And if you don't get it down now, so went right after my father retired, he sat down and he wrote a memoir. And it's, and then he died when he was 77. He was in fairly good health, we thought. He died suddenly. Boy, am I glad he wrote that memoir. So don't be afraid to make a channel, even if nobody watches.
Yeah. Very good. I'm going to contact you too about getting a venue for a meetup here in Silicon Valley.
Okay, because I was actually, a guy came to, not the last meetup, but the one before, from Watsonville. There's another guy I met in Santa Cruz. So, and actually, if, I can get a venue reliably in San Jose, the San Jose Christian Reformed Church, where we did one before. Okay, so maybe we'll have to do that again. I just wanted the pastor to show a little initiative, but he hasn't yet. So, but he said he was willing. He said he was interested. So we could do another one in San Jose CRC. They'd give me a room. So
yeah, I'd be happy to host it and bring the pizza.
Awesome, it's terrific. Well, thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Paul.
Take care. Bye-bye.